Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. Whichever time you're watching this, I'm really glad that you could join us. Today, I've got a group of people in and around Dundee across Scotland. We're going to be talking about the big discussion. We've got COP26 around the corner and we're in the middle of climate change and also a global pandemic. But two of those areas we're going to explore today together in a discussion over a cup of coffee. In fact, I've got my herbal tea. So it's here with us. And I'm going to ask each of my guests just to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with Andy. Andy, I wondered if you could unmute. Just tell me who you are, who you represent and what your interests are, and also how you are today.
Yeah, I'm Andy Lanwarn. I'm the coordinator of Friends of the Earth Tayside, which as you probably know, is a voluntary grouping, grassroots grouping of people concerned about the environment. And we cover Dundee and the wider Tayside region, but particularly focusing on Dundee. And we see COP26 as, well, obviously it's a major event. We'll be talking about that shortly. And it's an opportunity for us to raise awareness of the urgency of climate change. So I'm finding we're pretty fully stretched on this at the moment and hoping to make the most of it. So that's me. Oh, how am I? Yeah, I'm kind of a bit frazzled now after some initial technology issues. So we hope things go smoothly now. Okay, cheers.
Okay, that's great, Andy. Thank you. And I hope you've got a cup of coffee or cup of tea, whatever your beverage is. Naomi, I'm going to come on to you next, if that's okay, and just ask you again, how are you, first of all? Because it's a long time since we've seen each other.
Yes, no, I'm really well, thank you, Kevin. I'm enjoying the lovely weather, like everyone probably is now, and a little bit more freedom is fantastic, getting out and about. Yeah, I'm Naomi Clark. I work for Dundee City Council. I'm the Sustainability and Climate Change Officer there, and myself and my manager, Brian Harris, kind of helped coordinate and pull together Dundee's Climate Action Plan, which I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, and relating it to COP26.
Fantastic. That's really great. Thank you. Lindsay, can I come to you next? Because we were together only a week ago on another blog like this.
I know. Yeah, I'm really good. We have a lot going on at work just now, lots of exciting things. So it's busy, but really good. So yeah, I'm Lindsay Penny, and I work at the Gate Church Carbon Saving Project, and we have several community kind of climate action initiatives. I also I'm on the steering group with Andy for the Dundee Climate Action Network, whose aim is to bring together lots of climate action and community groups trying to do something about climate change and to help us all work together. So I think that's kind of why we're both here. So yeah, is that enough, Kevin?
That's perfect. I mean, we'll obviously get more out of you later on. I'll ask you a more directed question, but in the interim, what I'll do is I'll go over to Mike. And Mike, I know you're overlooking the Botanic Gardens at the moment, as I'm over on the coast at Arbroath. You're looking down at us from Mengus Hill. So how is it over there, and how are you?
It's a gorgeous day. Looking out down over the river over to Fife. I'm assuming that the Botanic Gardens is where it's meant to be, and therefore I am looking down over it, although I can't see it. I'm Mike Arnott. I'm actually employed by Dundee City Council, but I'm here with my trade union hat on. I'm secretary of Dundee Trade Union Council, which is an affiliate organisation with many thousands of Dundee trade unionists from different branches, from different industries affiliated to us. And we're the local body of the Scottish TUC. I'm actually an elected member of the Scottish TUC General Council. And there are many trade unionists who have an active and work-based involvement and concern about the whole issue of climate change. There's been a long-running campaign against climate change trade union WhatsApp group on the go. We have our own policies, which some of you will have seen, for how Dundee can change for the better, and the way that investment should be made in the city for getting the most out of any kind of climate investment, but looking towards Dundee making a major contribution towards climate change and climate justice.
Mike, that's wonderful, and it's great to have you here on board. And in terms of that representation of a wider body, again, our voices and through us, hearing what's going on around the country, how people are feeling, what's going on locally is really important. And actually, we've got one of our more youthful representatives today, not saying everybody's not young, but Quan, I wondered if I could actually turn to you, because I think you're one of the youth members of Friends for the Earth, but you're also involved in COP26. So who are you, how are you, and where are you?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm actually not that young anymore, but yeah, I think I qualify still as like just for like young Friends of the Earth. Yeah, my name's Wung. I'm living in Edinburgh, actually, so thank you for inviting me virtually to Dundee. And I am here because I'm the coordinator for the COP26 Coalition, the Scottish half of the coordination team, and I'm jumping in for my colleague Tess, who's the mobilization officer but is feeling a bit under the weather. And the COP26 Coalition is an alliance, a broad civil society alliance across the UK that is organizing more than the usual suspects around climate change and climate justice. We're trying to bring together trade union groups, like Micah said, faith groups, youth groups, environmental groups, but also migrant justice and anti-racist groups to come together, push for climate justice, and hold the governments that are gathering in Glasgow to account as much as we can. And yeah, that's me, and I'm feeling good today. Had my vaccine a couple of days ago, and now I've recovered. So yeah, thanks again for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure, and thank you for that. And I hope the sun is still shining on Edinburgh like it is up here on the coast, without the har that they've got in between us. Claire, I know you're over in Fife, aren't you? And in terms of joining us today, you've got an interest at a school, but I wanted to hear a bit about you. I want to know how you are today, and what issue you want to raise a little bit later on. If you could share that, I'd be grateful.
Hi there, I'm Claire Luxford, and I live in Ceres, which is a village near Cooper in Fife. I actually work as a music teacher and a musician, but climate activism is something I'm passionate about that I do on the side where I've got time, as well as looking after 2 children. So yes, it keeps me busy, and I like doing climate activism because it makes me feel like I'm making a difference in another way from my music teaching, which obviously is making people happy, but I feel like we also need to look after the future. And because I have children, I care a lot about the future for them and for their generation. So I'm very pleased to take part in this discussion. I'm also a member of XR Dundee, and I'm in Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, you name it. I've joined them all. And I've also founded my own little baby organisation here in Ceres, in my village, which is called Ceres Trees. And our idea is to plant as many trees and hedges and so on in the surrounding area as we can. So this is direct action locally. And it's great to be here. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Claire. Thank you. And maybe I can encourage you to join our rewilding movement as well, because rewilding our urban situations, we've got a project here called Rewilding Dundee, which isn't our project, it's everyone's project. It just allows us to rewild one plot, one tree for you, or one window ledge at a time across the city, supporting that work that's going on in the public realm through the council, but doing it in the private realm. So we're working together. And in a way, that's the sort of way this conversation is, isn't it? Here we are coming together as a sense of community to look at a big issue. I've called it the big discussion. And I wondered, Andy, in terms of sort of broadening out, you know, we could do with some sort of sense of understanding what climate change is and why is it important. I wonder if you could actually give us an overview of that.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Well, climate change is something that has been going on since the planet formed, but at a very, very, very slow rate. And we have had in the past, we've had cold spells, we've had ice ages, a mini ice age in, I think, medieval period. But in the last 200 years, we've been affecting the climate through our industrial processes, pumping out carbon dioxide and methane and other gases which contribute to a layer of greenhouse gases which heat the atmosphere. And that's a problem for us because it's happening quicker than geological timescales. It's happening in our lifetimes, and we've warmed up the planet's temperature over the industrial era by over 1 degree now, which doesn't sound very much, but it does cause an awful lot of disruption to the climatic system. And the climatic system is a global system. Things that happen here in Scotland affect the planetary climate system. And so that means that we have to be concerned about our impact, and we have to reach agreement with other countries on how we contribute towards the working of the climate system. We can see now as the temperature's risen by just 1 degree or so, it's causing melting of the ice caps. It's even warmer at the poles than the average. So the ice caps are melting quite steadily, and it's opening up the Arctic Ocean to exploration. And even though there's a general agreement that climate change is a problem, countries are rushing to exploit the resources in the Arctic Ocean which are becoming accessible, including oil and gas. And that's why we need a global agreement on how we manage the climate. But we also need a global agreement because some countries are affected much more by this than others, by flooding, by heat waves, that sort of thing, by drought. And certain countries, such as Britain, the first to industrialize, is more responsible. We are more responsible, along with the US and increasingly countries like China. We're more responsible than less developed countries. So that's why we need global agreement, and that's why COP26 is so important. We had an agreement in Paris, but no real commitment. And we now need countries to make those commitments and to have commitments that are ambitious, because we've known about this for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years, but we haven't really done anything about it. And we need to, that means the action needs to be taken now and urgently and be more far-reaching than if we'd started in 1990, when we knew very well what we were doing to the climate. So that's why it's urgent. That's why we need to have dramatic reduction in carbon emissions. And we need to let people know why, just as with COVID, we had to make radical changes in our behavior, we have to make radical changes in how we live. And we need the technology to do that. And hopefully a lot of those changes we can accommodate, but people need to understand what's happening and what the impacts of climate change are. And we're already seeing a lot of these. And we also need to engage people so that they'll put pressure on our government and other governments, on politicians, and really give them the permission to make those commitments on our behalf to curb our emissions. So that's why it's important. We need to get people involved, understanding and putting pressure on those who make the big decisions.
Okay, thank you, Andy, for giving us that sort of overview. And Naomi, I'm going to turn to you next, but before I do, I'm just going to put that into context, because Andy's raised this issue. It's a global issue, but it happens at the local level. So we're all implicit in this, and there is a a call, an opportunity with governments at COP26 to do something about that. But when it comes down to doing something about that, governments really don't do that work, do they? It's actually, it comes down to those that are devolved with some of that responsibility, like local authorities, or down to the individuals, and we're trying. So we're in it together, aren't we? Could you just give us a sort of an overview, what councils in Scotland are doing in trying to mobilise public action, to galvanise some of the resources that are being made available for them, but maybe also to lobby for more resource, because that would be really helpful in setting the scene. Thank you.
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, we're, I think all of the local authorities now realise that we have to develop these climate action plans, which is what Dundee has done. I think we've kind of led in Scotland on this, kind of declaring a climate emergency, as not all local authorities have, but quite a few have. We'd actually started developing our climate action plan in 2018. Co-designing it with public, private and community organisations. I think all local authorities realise this is something to be coordinated by the local authority, but not necessarily led. It has to be a kind of cooperative process. Our plan was launched in 2019. Emissions inventories generally will find that the main emissions in local authorities are from buildings. That's the same nationwide. About 75% of our carbon emissions come from heating and lighting buildings. And most local authorities, that's a few percent of the contribution to their area's emissions. It's only 4% in Dundee. So they all recognise that a citywide approach is essential. We kind of come up with 4 themes, which are probably, as any local authority would be energy as a priority, transport is the next priority, because that's about 20% of emissions come from transport, waste, and then climate resilience is obviously an extremely important and becoming much more embedded in what local authorities are doing now as well. And we come up with about 64 actions across these themes, but that is really just the very start of the pathway to net zero. All local authorities have to submit mandatory carbon reporting every year, and now they have to show their commitment to net zero. And they also have to report on their climate adaptation work as well. And that's becoming more and more kind of strict as time goes by. So we are doing things like what most local authorities are doing are kind of programs of retrofitting their housing stock, retrofitting public buildings. So it's kind of fabric first approach, lots of insulation, energy efficient heating, that kind of thing. Looking at renewables, obviously, district heating. With transport, we're looking at low emission zones, more active travel. We've got a really good cycling strategy in Dundee, which we're trying to implement. There's working with bus companies. As you know, Dundee is very forward thinking when it comes to electric vehicles. And then with waste, there's going to be a new target of 75% recycling rates across Scotland by 2025. And that's going to be extremely challenging, particularly for some local authorities like Dundee, where we have a lot of multi-storey developments. Our recycling rates are currently only 38%. So it's a really monumental task to increase that. Things like the circular economy are becoming more important, and we are, like some other local authorities, developing a circular economy strategy for the council. I'm working with organisations like Circular Tayside. And then with climate resilience, we conducted a risk and vulnerability assessment across lots of different sectors. We really looked at the impacts and risks of the hotter, drier summers and warmer, wetter winters that are going to come along with the increased flooding and more sort of catastrophic storms in Dundee, and how that's going to impact services, businesses, infrastructure, people, and all looking at all the opportunities. I think that's the thing that we're probably finding anything we're working on is only going to bring positive solutions. It's only going to be good. You know, if we're having more local food, better active travel routes, you know, renewable heating, reducing fuel poverty, it's all really positive. So I think, yeah, with COP26, that's kind of given us all an opportunity to work together to make that happen. It's really sort of helping drive that forward, create a lot of new exciting partnerships. And yeah, the only other thing we're really doing that's really interesting is emissions modelling, because we know we can get government data about where the emissions are for Dundee, but what we want to know is what are the impacts of the actions that we're developing. So if we can model that, and it's a lot more complicated than it sounds, it's a lot more difficult to get data than you would think, then we can really show exactly where we are on the pathway to net zero and how adding actions are going to take us forward, where the gaps are, help decision making and investments and that kind of thing. So that's kind of where we are.
Naomi, that's great. You've perfectly framed it for me to move to Quan now and ask about COP26. And you know, you've heard the big picture from Andy, you've heard the local picture from our local authority. And in terms of COP26 as an opportunity, could you tell us a bit more about it, Quan, and also how can it be used to promote climate justice, you know, beyond our own regional barriers?
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, like a lot of the stuff that I wanted to say has been said by Andy already, but yeah, just I don't want to like bore you too much with the technical details, but what COP26 basically is, it stands for Conference of the Parties, which means the countries who have signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. All the nations that have signed that, the UK is one of them, are party to that treatment, and this is the 26th time these parties are meeting up in Glasgow. And as Andy has said, this time it's quite important, or it's treated as like especially important because it is going to be the meeting where the Paris Agreement that has been done in 2015 should be updated for the next pathways towards 2 degrees or below, hopefully. So that is kind of like the goal, and people have set a quite ambitious agenda for the governments, and there's going to be quite a lot of debates around what has happened at COP25 around carbon markets, carbon pricing, these kind of things, net zero targets for all countries over the world, and so on. And yeah, and I just wanted to note before I go into climate justice, these things sound really technical and sound quite complicated with all the treaties and stuff, and that is on purpose. If you're confused about that, there's a point to that. This entire process makes a very political issue that affects people's livelihoods into a technical, complicated thing that is very hard to follow. So in this year, if you're like confused by what the government is doing, that is on purpose. And don't let yourself be confused by that. Keep asking critical questions on what is going on. And yeah, so with climate justice, I have to be honest and say that the COP process so far has not delivered that. And it is kind of like unlikely that COP this year in Glasgow is gonna save the planet. Instead, we should look at COP26 as Naomi has said, as a moment where we can galvanize ourselves into climate action, into mobilizing our movements, into working together, because we know that the governments of this world don't really have things under control and will increase their amount of greenwashing they have employed to like throw us off the scent and like give the impression that everything's under control, which is not the case. Because what climate justice means is that those who are most worst off right now and are least responsible for the climate crisis are already suffering the worst impacts for it, which is mostly countries in the global south, frontline communities, indigenous communities who are already affected by flooding, heat waves, and so on. But that is also true for Scotland. If you think about like yeah, the poorest communities in Scotland are also most likely to suffer under the impact of fossil fuel infrastructure. If you think about Mossmoran and Fife near Cowdenbeath and Lochgelly, those are some of the most marginalised communities in Scotland, and they're suffering the most under fossil fuel infrastructure. And these things are still not being phased out, despite all the promises by Scottish and UK governments about net zero. So these kind of things need to be called out, and that is something we need to do in the run-up to COP, during COP, and after COP. And the second thing is that we need to remember, from a climate justice lens, is that the climate crisis is only a symptom, but also a cause of the general dysfunctions of our economic system. So this is just like one piece of the puzzle, and that is why it's so important to bring other movements in, from the trade union movement, from anti-racist movements. These are all, this all stems from a failure of our economic system that puts profit before people and planet. And without addressing and transforming this economic system, we won't be able to address the climate crisis properly. So yeah, so that is the situation we're at. And it's going to be difficult, but it's really necessary to push against the government narrative about having everything under control, call out the greenwashing that is coming out. And that is important not only to happen in Glasgow, but also in Dundee, in Edinburgh, in the Highlands, in Aberdeen, in wherever. We need to all speak with one voice and speak for climate justice as loudly as possible. Yeah, and I think I'll leave it there because I've spoken a little bit already. But
again,
yeah,
perfect segue again to you know, a call to action, but a clarification of actually what the opportunity is, and also giving some pointers to the things that we might be able to do. And what I'm going to now refer to is Mike through the Dundee Trade Union Council, and I'm going to ask you specifically about the impact on people in work, and what is a just transition to a new, more sustainable employment basis for all.
Thanks, Kevin. Initially, for many workers, the focus of a just transition to a low carbon economy was based on the offshore industry, because obviously there were many thousands of employees in that industry. And if we're moving away from a carbon-based economy, the solution to be found for those jobs and the people in those jobs was obviously a very vital one for the trade union movement. There are still long memories that remember the way that the miners in Fife and in Lanarkshire were basically dumped when their industry was shut down, and they received no justice at all. So the justice for existing workers that are going to be affected by the transition is one that initially we were very concerned with, and that's still a concern. I think moving forward, the potential of a just transition is that there would be jobs to replace that from a very sort of a green investment and green economy point of view. I think that's been disappointing, and I think the language of the Scottish government has been disappointing as far as they talk the talk to an extent, but as far as walking the walk, that's still to be seen. There seems to be a reliance on the private sector, which the Scottish TUC and us in Dundee do not see as any kind of way forward. We would see the need for massive public investment in strategies. One that Dundee Trade Union Council is advocating is massive investment in housing. Scottish and Southern Electricity say that 40,000, more than half the homes in Dundee, are in need of significant work as far as energy is concerned. Now, we would see that translating into massive investment in insulation, roofs, walls, windows, retrofitting, solar and heat pumps, other issues like that. Now, the plus of that, the win-win, is that you're investing in the local community. Any savings you're making in people's energy consumption, their bills savings will go straight into their pockets. So that's a win. We would like to see that focusing on the outlying areas of Dundee who have maybe not benefited from the investment in Dundee recently that seems to have focused on the waterfront. And the benefit for people living and working in Dundee needs to fill that gap as far as the lack of results as far as we've seen from promised offshore and wind fabrication jobs, because that's singularly failed to materialize, certainly in Dundee and wider. If you look at Bifab in Fife, a fabrication yard with a long offshore tradition, which should be booming as far as the industrial requirements of Scotland to address what's going on offshore, just hasn't happened. And that's because a lot of offshore fabrication has been offshored as far as Thailand. They're shipping wind turbines from Thailand to put up off the Fife coast. And these are initiatives organized through Scottish and Southern Electricity. It's the irony is astounding. So we would like to see in Dundee, even in Dundee, we would like to see something like £250 million invested in retrofitting, in investment, in housing, in new construction on passive house basis for an increased social housing. We would like to see the Scottish Government's commitment of £3 billion up to at least £13 billion, which we believe would create something like 150,000 jobs across Scotland. There are other initiatives. Our friends in Glasgow Trade Union Council are very much behind the environmentalising of public transport as far as free bus services are concerned, and the work which is going on at the old Michelin Park, the old Michelin factory, into hydrogen cell development for public transport is also an inspiring possibility, which should eventually trump electric cars as far as a source of energy. People generating electricity elsewhere to plug in to vehicles. This would be transformative as far as hydrogen technology is concerned. So we very much do not believe that the private sector are the answer. We believe that Scottish Government, public sector, local government in leading this kind of investment which touches the local economy and the local people in our economies, living in and around Dundee, benefiting them directly, is the best way of making an investment towards a green economy.
Mike, thank you. I think there were many things in there that Naomi had sort of flagged up as an opportunity, and I think you're reaching a concord across that opportunity and challenge, which Quan, you've pointed out. We're not going to resolve it in one go, but this is an iterative process that we have an opportunity to engage with. Now we've heard high level and we've heard sort of more strategic level, but Lindsay, I wondered if I could turn to you and ask at a personal level, what are the things that we can do as individuals in and around Dundee and the region of Tayside and across Scotland to make a difference?
That's a big question, Kevin. So as a project, our focus, I'm talking about the Gate Church project and not the Climate Action Network. I've got too many hats on. As a project, we've been funded by the Climate Challenge Fund for many years now, which is all about trying to engage with the community and show them ways in which they can reduce their personal footprints. And I think, yeah, there's obviously many different ways. I'm sure most of you know, so I don't want to go into, I'll talk about the basics. So Climate Challenge Fund kind of split it into 4 or 5 main groups. So you would have waste, and reuse, so that's for clothing, household goods, all sorts of things. There will be food, so it includes food waste, but also local food supply, and growing your own, encouraging more people to grow their own. What else do we have? So there's travel, encouraging active travel and more sustainable transport. Oh, just put me on the spot now, Kevin. I'm thinking, what was the other one? Waste, food, education. So a thing that we've been trying to do over the last few years is do more workshops for the public. So, it's you know, we've been trying to be using lots of different little things to kind of hook them in, because I think, you know, at a certain time, a lot of people cared about the plastic thing. So we did a workshop about how to reduce your plastic use. And we use that as the hook because that's what they care about. But we talk about how that fits into the bigger picture of climate change, and hopefully make them see how it's not just about the pollution, but it's also about, yeah, everything else that's related to that. So yeah, I think being in Dundee, we've got quite special circumstances, I guess, because you've got such a range of people in Dundee, and we ourselves are based in the West End. So even then, you know, we're in a slightly more privileged area, but you do have people that live in you know, high levels of insecurity. And so a lot of the projects that we do are about trying to bring the community together and build community and bring those groups together who might not necessarily be together. And that's through things like our community fridge, which is all about food waste, and the community wardrobe, which is all about secondhand clothing. But yeah, and previously we've worked with many other organisations around the city, which COVID has really hampered, you know, being able to go to a community cafe in Whitfield and do a pop-up clothing wardrobe for them, or a sewing corner where they can learn to sew their own clothes. I think there's such a demand in our communities to upskill themselves to know more about these things. And I think it's quite overwhelming for a lot of people. So we're currently looking at how can we maybe try and help with some of the kind of climate anxiety issues that are coming up as well. It's something that we're going to try and build in some of our project activities, because especially the younger people, they're really, I think it's, especially with COVID on top of all of this, I think it's really, you know, impacting young people quite a lot, and not just young people, but so that's, yeah, something that we're going to be looking at going into the future.
Lindsay, you did wonderfully there. In terms of, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but also
Okay.
I know how much good work you are doing in community, and I think pulling on those threads and giving tangible opportunities for people who are watching us today, tomorrow, next week, to find a way in. I mean, that's the important thing, without being overwhelmed, because it is overwhelming. As Kwan said, you know, there is some justification to say it's complex. It's a complex, adaptive problem. It's global. As Andy said, as Naomi said, there's so much we can do within the political realm, and that's happening locally, but it's going to take time to galvanize. And as Mike has shown, there is an opportunity for us to transition into a better place. However, we're in it, and we've already had an impact, haven't we? And picking up on that thread about the young people, and appealing now to Claire as a young mother, but also somebody who's actually engaged with the school. And I'm going to call it slow hope, because what you've actually engaged in is a process of transition, support, and engagement to help the next generation look forward. So, what do you think in terms of that experience that you've gone through? We can bring to a wider group here as a discussion point, and say, how can we help people, especially the young people who are going to inherit the mess that we give them, but also the opportunities that we give them to create a better world going forward? What does that look like, Claire?
Well, I think as a mother, one of the things that I care a lot about is passing on to my children a sense of personal responsibility. And that entails me taking personal responsibility for my impact on the environment, and changing my lifestyle in ways that perhaps a lot of my contacts would consider radical, but they're actually what's needed. So, for example, you know, ditching my diesel car, doing a lot more via e-bikes. I even managed to do my Christmas shopping on e-bike back a couple of years ago when my family came to stay. Not flying. I haven't flown since 2017. We're all vegetarian. I've just told my children that vegetarianism is something that's going to help the planet, and there's an amazing amount of delicious vegetarian food out there. They don't need to eat meat, and they weren't too happy to start with, but now they've just adapted to it, because we all adapt. I think it's, and there's a large list of other things that we've done, because I feel like I can't speak up for these issues unless I've made the changes in my own life, because actions speak louder than words. I think behind all this as well, there's just a sort of a moral substance, if you like, to do with what we value in life, and to do with being grateful for what we've been given, and not wanting things that actually aren't necessarily going to make us happy, but just accepting the way things are, and having gratitude, having awareness, and recognizing that we don't need to go on skiing holidays to have a good time, or we don't need to anything, you know, we don't need to go into the supermarket and buy blueberries from Peru in order to have a good meal. And all these, I think all these small decisions add up to ultimately quite a large statement, which I want my children to take on board now, rather than have to gradually learn for themselves later on, when things are going to get tougher, you know. And I think they need to know all about this from as young an age as possible. They're actually 12 and 15 now, so they're well able to understand the issues. So as I was doing a lot of things as a family, I then realised that I'd have more impact if I got the school involved, because my children being adolescents, they're also very influenced by their peers and by the staff at their school and so on. So they go to the High School of Dundee, and I hadn't heard very much about sustainability from the school, if anything. So I got in touch with my daughter's year group, the parents of her year group, and suggested that we set up a sustainability forum. So that's just been about possibly 8 months or something. And we've had a couple of meetings with the head teacher. We've got another one coming up next week. And we're just trying to get the school to really take climate change and sustainability seriously, and get the whole school community talking about it. So not just being a classroom issue, but it being something that they communicate with parents about, and children then take it out to their wider families, and then they can have more of an impact on the whole community.
That's brilliant to see that call to action at a personal level then come through and become an influencer that you look to give away to make a difference in your community. And I think there's something about that, isn't it? Something has changed, something will change, and we need to adapt. And having someone who's living proof of adapting and enjoying it, and not missing those skiing trips, and at the same time sharing is caring in that community, isn't it? That wider interest, and you meet new people and find new ways of doing things, and this is part of where we are now. So I think in terms of just opening up a little bit more to the floor now, and thinking on that thread, how do we give opportunities for people to engage with both COP26 on one level, their school group, or within the church community that Lindsay talked about, or even within the council as a business? You know, Naomi, you might end up talking to someone who's in business or in community, and how do they get involved? Naomi, what do you think?
Really, there's been so much excitement generated by COP26 already. The momentum is huge. So schools is one thing. So in Dundee, we had only about 4% of schools participated in the Eco Schools programme. And that's a fantastic programme with lots of support from Keep Scotland Beautiful. It provides a real structure for schools who want to do eco stuff, but they don't know where to start, or they're kind of doing little bits and bobs, and they just need it to kind of be maybe more organised, or just access resources and support. So we had quite low uptake in Dundee, because it used to be quite an onerous system. But when we kind of informed schools that it was much easier, that we could support them, we provided local resources, local contacts, as well as Keep Scotland Beautiful, We now have like 40% of schools. They haven't got the green flags yet, but they are engaging with it. And we already had sort of increased a lot last year. The lockdown really curtailed things, as you can imagine. We had an Eco Schools conference planned at RSS Discovery with 8 schools, and we were all really excited about it, but got postponed. But now we've actually had a whole load more schools join on when we had a meeting last week about this, all wanting to engage with COP26, wanted to start their Eco Schools journey. I feel like each of the Eco Schools and COP26 have kind of benefited each other here. They're going to get involved with lots of activities. We're going to put on that Eco Schools conference. They're creating some of the schools are creating a giant whale sculpture. And the whole process will be filmed, and they'll learn all about waste and everything. What I'm finding is the kids are already sold on this. The kids are already wanting to take action. The parents and teachers are already really pushing this. And now that we're kind of connecting them with the Eco Schools programme, they've got a way to really fully engage. So I think as far as schools are concerned, that's going really well. The Chamber of Commerce are really constantly educating businesses, providing information and resources to businesses about climate change and how they can engage with the whole sustainability agenda. So the way they engage with COP26, I think, has yet to be explored. But as a council, we have organised, we're kind of coordinating a COP26 planning group, and that's just getting more and more partners every time we meet, and you'd be welcome to join in with that, Kevin, and anyone else. And what we're doing is pulling together a programme of events that can reach everyone. So, there'll be some aimed at schools, some aimed at businesses, some in local communities. We have Creative Dundee there. We're trying to think of, interesting and exciting activities, some educational. MVV at Baldubby will do like a week of tours, for example. So we're trying to, from the 26th of September right through to the 12th of November, we're trying to hit as many kind of organisations and individuals as possible. But then what we're thinking is, what we've got to understand is that COP26 is only for this year, and it's what we can do, what's the legacy of that. That's going to be the really important bit. And with all these extra partners we've now got on board, hopefully we can sort of continue to collaborate beyond that, and keep kind of delivering a sustainable Dundee if we can. So I see it as a real launch pad to kind of accelerating our climate action plan.
That's brilliant. In terms of both sharing that from the school level and then coming through to the Chamber of Commerce. And I'm just going to turn to Andy now and ask the same question in terms of getting involved, but from a different perspective, because I think the support of a group, and I know here that you're representative of a number of groups within Dundee, but one in particular, Friends of the Earth. And I wondered if you just talk about ways that individuals, if they're a bit unsure themselves, how might they get involved with a group in Dundee? Where's the best source of information for them for that? Or indeed Tayside across Scotland, if you've got that insight.
I think all of these groups have got their Facebook pages, their websites. They're keen to involve people who are interested in the issues around climate change, who are concerned about climate change. And speaking to one person, myself or Lindsay, or you can find contacts for other groups, because there is quite a network. I mean, that's what Dundee Climate Action Network is. It's a network of organisations, community groups, individuals who are involved and interested and concerned about climate change. I think what's particularly important, I heard an interesting piece on the radio the other day about Sweden, where they've appointed a storyteller to tell stories about what life could be like in a net zero society. And he was pointing out how actually it's quite boring. It's just ordinary people's lives, but it was showing how they would be different and how you can cope, how you can manage in a net zero world. But it would be different means of transport. It would be different holiday patterns, as Claire has said, but you know, we would do things differently. We would still have fun. We would still get bored. We would still have arguments, but life would go on, and we can cope with it. And Claire said her kids have got used to this kind of vegetarian lifestyle. It's become the normal, and new different ways of living will become normal. We have to see how it relates to our lives, and that will get people interested. Talking, as Kwan's pointed out, you know, these technical arguments at COP26 are pretty meaningless to the ordinary people in Dundee, and we have to turn that into everyday reality of how things will be different. And community groups like ours have to be able to interpret the meaning of it for people living around us, and talk to them, listen to their stories. This has been pointed out in our meetings recently. Members have said, well, it's not about us telling people, it's about us listening to people. What are their lives like? What are the problems? What are the concerns? And relating the issues of climate change and recycling and circular economy and getting around in different ways, relate that to people's lives, how it can make them healthier and fitter and happier, not how it makes them more deprived in a sense. It's about enriching people's lives in many respects. So I think we have to get that kind of conversation with people, and they will then see that our organisations are relevant to their lives, and hopefully they'll join, or they'll support in various ways and get involved.
That's while you were just sharing that, in terms of that link between big issues and local communities and individuals, and it also thinking about the voices, listening rather than telling. That's an important thread just dropped into my mind, because I've just spent 6 months on a learning journey, a bioregioning learning journey, which we've got a bioregion group now in Tayside, looking at that transition by looking at the past to inform the present, so that we can understand how better to work in all sorts of ways in our system for the future. That's another group that's worth looking up. But we were introduced to the Passamaquoddy tribe in North America on the East Coast, and the chief there talks about two-eyed seeing with indigenous knowledge, a sense of place, and also seeing through Western eyes, because our mental model, of course, is very much indoctrinated by what we've been told and what we read and the way that we work with each other. But there is a sense of understanding and empathizing with that local voice and hearing that. An example that, again, pulled out of some of my own research is that if we went back prior to 1800 in Angus, and you were working in the landscape, because nearly 85% of us would have been working and living in the landscape, not in the urban centres. So only 300 years ago, and yet, well, we've got a population that their day's circle of walking there would have been 8 miles within the centre of where they lived, and they would have been within a kin group of probably 6 to 10 people. So the sense of kin and community was so much stronger than now, whereas now, how many people have found their neighbours during COVID because they didn't know who they were next door, let alone understand what it really means to have a sense of community, or need other people to help us engage with issues that are outside of our control. And COVID's a good example of that. And climate change, as we know, the implications of doing nothing are huge, aren't they? They're huge, you know, and they could be catastrophic. Indeed, they already are being. I mean, in my world, plants, 2 out of every 5 species of plant is threatened with extinction by 2015. And we're losing plants and animals left, right and centre, you know, just the insect count, the abundance of diversity from remembering what it was like as a child growing up, because I was born in 1967 when parts per million of carbon dioxide in the air were only 322, and now they're over 400. And the insect abundance was something that you could sit back and hear in a field. Whereas I walked the fields of Angus this summer and you don't hear anything except for a tractor and an aeroplane and then a car. There's nothing out there. It's devoid because it's intensive agriculture. It's full of petrochemicals. It's full of pollutant into our watercourses, excess nitrates. But it's growing the food that feeds our bellies in the current supply system, but it feeds into a global, international market, not our hungry cities on our doorsteps. And there are opportunities for us to change all of that, which is something we've touched on now. But just a last move around the room, and if I'll start with Kwam, in terms of listening today, because rather than talking, what have you heard today that's challenged you, given you hope, or made you think a little bit more differently than when you came into the meeting?
Thanks. I think for me it was like really hopeful to like see that there's already so much activity in Dundee. So at the moment, my work involves trying to bring together people across the UK in local hubs, organized so that it's not, so that climate action is not only happening in Glasgow and all attention is there, but across the country, across Scotland, and across the UK. And yeah, what I've heard from Naomi, Andy, Claire, I think there's already a lot of activity in and around Dundee, and I would be really excited to support that. So that was really heartening to hear. And yeah, let's use the next few months as best as we can so that we can do something that actually outlasts the COP and build new alliances with people that need to get involved. Yeah.
Brilliant. And Mike, if I could turn to you, is there something you've heard today that's given you hope or challenged you, or indeed gives you a sense of inspiration to do something else?
I liked what Kwan was saying about the involvement of the community. We've built links over many years with a number of groups in the peripheral estates around Dundee, groups like the Lochie Larder, groups like Dundee Together, who have really stood up and taken leadership roles, particularly during COVID, as far as giving their communities stability, food, sources of advice, and the organizations around that, based in communities, campaigning against universal credit sometimes. These are the organizations I would like to see taking the advantage of becoming involved in COP26, but also in the broader environmental strategy, because I see this very much as a potential for being a bubbling up campaign rather than a trickle down activity. I was just thinking of the environmental issues of the developments that are needed that we've been talking about retrofitting. If we could have the kind of scale of retrofitting that we're talking about with that kind of investment, obviously not originating from Dundee City Council, but originating with the Scottish Government and then filtering through. If we've got locally based organizations and locally based tradespeople, companies, hopefully through the Environment Department's Construction Services Department, making sure that this investment in retrofitting and building passive house standard community housing can be kept, as far as locals concerned, the money within the local pockets, the supply chains kept locally, the skills and trades that need to be brought into that as far as apprentices are concerned, young people learning as heating engineers, as electricians in construction, that whole project could be massive. And that's another issue that I think would help address real concerns in Dundee about the two Dundees that have been perceived as growing up and really are growing up, as far as the contrast between maybe Kirkton, Charleston, and the waterfront development. There's a definite disjuncture there. There's a definite focus that needs to shift. And I think this investment in this program, which will go on way beyond COP26, as I said, our costed program of £250 million is over. That's 3 V&As over 10 years. which would have real benefits in people's pockets. That's the kind of thing we would like to see. We've been speaking to other partners. Dundee Pensioners Forum are aware of what we do. We're away to be liaising with the Dundee Tenants Federation, because obviously a lot of this is on housing investment. So that, to us, is the way forward, keeping it very much grassroots, public sector, out of the hands of people who are going to take the money and run, which we saw during the banking crisis, which we've seen at as part of the COVID response. We want that money to stay democratically and within the community.
That's a nice call to action and a solution there that links a thread. And I think, thinking of the future, Claire, is there anything that you heard today that inspires you, challenges you, or makes you think a little bit?
I was particularly interested to hear about the council's initiatives in education from NARI, and I thought it would be great to get Dundee High School on board with some of the real schemes, which sound very exciting. And interested to hear about the retrofitting from Mike as well. This is something that I'm in the middle of doing in my house, is to replace my gas boiler with a heat pump. And I was just surprised to find there was actually money there earmarked through the renewable heat incentive to come back into your pocket. But I hadn't known anything about it. I think this is a scheme that hasn't been widely publicised enough, because it turns out, you know, it's not going to cost the earth, and the government is backing it, but this scheme is actually ending in March next year. So people need to get on board, or we need to try and get the scheme extended, because this is so important. I was interested to hear what a big proportion of our carbon dioxide emissions is caused by heating and lighting of homes. So this is something we really need to concentrate on as a society.
That's great, and it segues again perfectly back into Naomi, because Naomi, you shared some really interesting oversight into the council's facts and figures, and you know there is, and also you're beginning to identify, or you've identified core areas where we can make a difference and make that difference quite quickly. Whereas we recognise that some of that's going to take time to work towards net zero by 2045. It feels like a long time out, but it's actually, you know, it comes very quickly, and you've got to plan now. Is there anything today that you've heard which inspires you, gives you hope, apart from picking up another school through Claire? Which, if that's the only thing that comes out of it, I'm happy already. You've made me happy. But in terms of that, or indeed challenged you, just made you think a little bit differently about how you work, or what sort of conversations you have after this?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear other different viewpoints. I'm kind of, especially at the moment, I seem to be surrounded by enthusiasm and positive solutions and really productive collaborations. And it's actually easy to kind of look at all this through kind of rose-tinted glasses. And sometimes you need to be reminded of the actual monumental task that we've got ahead of us. I mean, we will be very lucky to make net zero by 2045 at the kind of rate of progress we're going. And, you know, we really, really do have to absolutely capitalise on COP26 and really start to make big, tangible jumps forward. But saying that, I am surrounded by really positive, enthusiastic, brilliant collaborations, and I do feel quite hopeful about it. But yeah, there's no room to just sit back. We've just got to kind of get on with it.
That's great. And in terms of that, both the reality of the challenge, but also that hope with that sense of community around us. And I'm going to turn to Lindsay now in terms of that, my local community, and somebody I look to work with, both have recently and look to do more of in the future. Lindsay, again, same sort of question. You know, what's inspired you, what's challenged you, and what do you take away from this?
Yeah, I think similar to Naomi, I think it's always important to have these kind of discussions with a variety of people and hear the different viewpoints, because we're all covered in different, you know, we're all coming from different places, and it's really, really important to listen to each other, as well as, you know, the public that we all deal with, or whatever our jobs are. I feel like in my work, or in the area that we're in, a lot of the focus is on individual actions, and that's not always possible for a lot of people. A lot of people have bigger problems than that. But if we can all work together in this way, and hear from a range of people, I just think the collaborative thing is going to be so important, to have people from the council talking with community groups, with someone, just all these groups. I just think more of this going forward, and that gives me a lot of hope. So yeah.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I'm going to turn to the last voice, to Andy, because it was Andy who started this for me. And there was a challenge of, what are we going to do for June the 12th? Well, it's not what we're going to do on our own, is what we're going to do together. And this is it. This is the first part of that. And I think it's been a really useful discussion from my perspective. And in terms of, I've learned a lot, and I've got a lot more contacts to pull upon and work with and collaborate with, and a lot more direction that I can probably hone myself to. But what have you got out of it? What's challenged you, and what do you think you're going to take home from this afterwards, in both hope and a little bit more effort required post it?
Thanks, Kevin. Well, I suppose I've taken from it just the range of different perspectives that there are on this, from the international perspective through to the trade union perspective, and the parental perspective, and working with the community, and trying to run things as a local authority, and even how the local botanic garden can help to bring things together. This is remarkable, and as Lindsay just said, the collaboration among us is so important and valuable as we try and change minds, and change politicians' minds, and change decisions, and change the way we live. Yeah, it is encouraging, as Naomi said, and you kind of you feel maybe this is possible. I suppose I'm rather a skeptic about the possibility of changing the minds of those in big business about what's important, because they're there to make money, and we've got to show them how, and governments have got to shape things about how money can be made in the future. What is the regulatory system's got to change, and as Mike has shown us, you can have a win-win situation by improving people's homes, which has so many economic and environmental and social benefits in a community. So I'm encouraged, and I can also see the challenge ahead of us is so enormous. So we've got to get on with it, but we've got to look to others to get on with it as well at COP26 and afterwards. So it's been a great conversation. So thanks, Kevin, for pulling it together.
Well, you are absolutely welcome, and I'd like to thank all of our guests today. We're in it together, and there is, for me, hope, slow hope that we'll make success. And 2045 feels like a long way off, but it also feels like a mountain to climb. And I think if we set ourselves that agenda and got these sort of people around us, we can make it happen. So there's a place for all of you who are watching this out here today, wherever you are, whether it's in your bed, in your slippers, out in your garden, or at work. And what I can do is just say at the end, there'll be a little list of who we are and how you can get hold of us, about the organisations that we're involved in, and hopefully through that you can feel a little bit more motivated to get involved and make your bit, whether it's one sunflower in a window box more than you would have planted, or whether it's helping out at the local community group with Lindsay or Andy, or indeed if you haven't thought about the union and the impact that has in your local area, you've heard the voice of Mike, and they are trying to make a difference and lobby on all of our behalves, and reach out if you know a school to Naomi, because she's got a group of eco activists that we're growing locally. And that, as I say in the gardens are about growing people and growing places, and I'm glad that we could host this with you today. Thank you very much for all your time.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you, and see you soon, hopefully.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great to see you all.